the pain like.
Hey guys, dearyoongi here, and welcome back to my channel. I thought it would be interesting for us to start looking into specific concepts on my channel, and no sooner than when this idea came to mind, the first example for me to speak about jumped right out at me. In today's video, we are going to be looking at darker concepts amongst K-pop girl groups. So first we'll start by looking at what exactly we mean by darker concepts in K-pop, examples of groups who had this concept and succeeded or didn't, as well as that important question, why do darker concepts seem to suffer in K-pop girl groups? So without further ado, let's get started. First of all, let's start by defining what exactly a dark concept is in K-pop. When we talk about dark concepts in K-pop, we're referring to themes that break away from the typical bright, cute, or elegant images we often see. A dark concept can mean anything that leans more into that mature, intense, or eerie side of a group that they can portray. This often includes visuals and storylines that perhaps may be inspired by horror, supernatural things like vampires or witches, dystopian settings, etc. For the styling, you might see more gothic or alternative outfit choices, dark or smoky makeup, and for the song itself, you might see like dramatic choreography or lyrics about like revenge, fear, power, more strong concepts if that makes sense. These concepts can be so interesting and creative and offer so much space for narrative, artistry, and that emotional depth. Dark concepts don't always have to be the most aesthetically pleasing or like visually appealing, but there's something intriguing and exciting about them. But despite all this, darker concepts have historically been a tough sell for K-pop girl groups. Now we'll get onto the many potential reasons for this a little bit later on, but for now let's look at some examples of K-pop girl groups who opted for a darker image or concept and the result of this. First of all, I wanted to start with Purple Kiss, since they were literally the inspiration for me wanting to create this video. Purple Kiss debuted in 2021 under RBW Entertainment and quickly garnered attention for their high potential, having members who weren't just talented idols, but also talented producers and contributed to that process. But aside from this, they also debuted with a concept that really made them stand out from the crowd. Their debut song, Ponzona, was like mysterious, had sort of a witchy, sort of theatrical vibe, which was something we hadn't seen much of, if at all, in 4th Gen at that time. During the eras that followed, the girls continued to follow a similar sort of vibe. Even though their concepts weren't always super dark or like mysterious, they continued to explore these high concept ideas. There was always something bold about their music that fit them into this category of having a darker concept, and they did it well. They were always able to create a layered sort of atmosphere with their music, and their choreography was complex and accompanied that perfectly. However, and it really shocks me to even say this, their story would not be one with a happy ending. The success rate of their comebacks would always fluctuate in popularity, and because the K-pop industry at its core is a business model designed of course to make as much money as possible, if the girls were not pulling in the money that RBW expected, they would ultimately suffer at the hands of this, and I think that's what's happened here. In what I think was RBW's attempts to hit a stride with the girls' success, in my opinion, their concepts did shift a few times in later years in between the sorts of concepts fans knew them for. So for example, Purple Kiss's February 2023 release, Sweet Juice, had that intriguing darker tone that fans knew and loved them for. Their next release, Seven Heaven, was in September of the same year, but this song was a much brighter concept, and although it showed their vocal tones off really well, it was nothing like the concept fans thought suited them and that they initially had as their identity when they debuted. It is rare that K-pop groups are able to survive such major concept shifts. It actually takes a large supportive fandom in order to do so. Casual listeners are less likely to stick around for whatever you put out unless it's something they really like. In August 2025, RBW announced that Purple Kiss would actually be disbanding later this year, after they drained a little bit more money out of them with tours and another album beforehand. Yes, you can tell that really didn't sit with me. I will genuinely be really upset to see Purple Kiss go, because there was something unique about them, and I thought they had the potential to be one of the biggest girl groups to come out of 4th Gen. Next example I wanted to look at is Pixie. Pixie was formed by All Arts Entertainment and Happy Tribe Entertainment, debuting back in 2021. Right from their debut track Wings, the girls appeared to have a clear image and concept. It was dark, super supernatural and fantasy heavy with stunning visuals. The girls released 5 singles in their debut year 2021 alone, and appeared to be building a fan base who really loved what they were offering. It was something different, and their concept was eerie, something we hadn't seen too much of at that time. The group had a very distinct identity which could have and should have been their strength. While the girls had a busy first year after debut, things began to take a turn in their second full active year. When the girls were due to come back in June 2022, one member of the group, Ella, did not participate and had to go on hiatus due to health reasons. In August of the same year, All Arts Entertainment announced that Ella and another member, Satbyol, would officially be leaving Pixie, and the group would be reorganized as 4 members. A new member joined the group in September, just in time for their European tour, and things seemed to be looking like they were on the up again for the girls in 2023, with new music and a US tour. They appeared to bounce back. Things unfortunately would take a turn again for the girls in 2024, with member Daejeong leaving in June, and member Lola announcing her departure from the group and label following the completion of her contract. Unfortunately, Pixie's journey has been marked by instability. Lineup changes do happen frequently amongst K-pop groups, and sometimes groups do survive them, but others aren't so lucky, and although Pixie haven't technically disbanded as of yet that we know of, fans have lost hope at this point due to them not releasing any new music since 2023, and their label seemingly having disappeared also. Pixie's story highlights just how having such a strong concept isn't enough without the stable management to back it. One more example is Nature. Nature debuted in 2018 under NCH Entertainment. I have no idea. Now you may be thinking, why are we discussing Nature? Because unlike other examples we've looked at so far, this group did not exactly debut with a dark concept, quite the opposite in fact, but they are an example of a group who dabbled in a few different concepts and styles. In 2020, Nature released a track titled Girls, and I'm gonna be honest, this was the first release that I actually remember hearing from them and knowing it was them, despite the group debuting 2 years prior and me even hearing some of their songs. Up until this release, I didn't hear any of their music and think, oh, that's Nature, if that makes sense. In the K-pop fan spaces I was on online, so social media, this song was very popular. The music video had a sort of horror concept with some more dark and creepy imagery, so much so that they had to release a censored and uncensored version. It quickly became one of their most popular releases, and fans loved this concept on them. They felt as though it suited them, and it helped drive a lot more new listeners to check out their music. And to be honest, they were probably very surprised when they noticed that none of their releases prior to this one sounded anything similar. But here's the catch. Instead of leaning into this momentum, their company quickly reverted to a lighter, more traditional girl group concept again like they were doing prior. It felt like they didn't trust this darker image and that it could sustain them in their career, so instead they just reverted back to what they were doing previously and that they knew. It was a backtrack, and that created confusion amongst fans, and in my opinion, I think this stalled their growth when it was about to take off. The label continued experimenting with all sorts of different concepts for the girls, and they eventually disbanded in April 2024. And I can't help but wonder what could have been if they had noticed the momentum the girls were getting and ran with it. Okay, so now that we've looked at the pattern of girl groups with darker concepts that unfortunately didn't stick around with examples, let's break down some of the reasons why darker concepts seem to struggle so much, especially when it comes to girl groups, because there's quite a few reasons. First up, let's start with the idea of commercial appeal and the ability to reach as wide an audience as possible. This is a massive factor in the longevity of any K-pop group, and it's the idea of finding something about you that is unique enough to stand out against the crowd, but it's also palatable for as wide an audience as possible to see the most success they can. It's quite a difficult line to tread, and unfortunately, darker concepts are still seen as something more niche within the K-pop industry, and simply just aren't seen as safe investments by many labels who are trying to find success in the mainstream media. A girl group with more intense vibes on stage, horror-esque music, and even styling and makeup that appears less publicly friendly is usually deemed more difficult to sustain. One big main pull that it appears the K-pop industry prides itself in is the ability to create artists who are fun and have something sweet and likable about them. Now, this is not to say that groups with dark music can't be fun, light-hearted, and likable. Of course they can. But a summer festival is more likely to invite artists who produce the fun, catchy beats of the summer, you know what I mean? Therefore, groups with these darker concepts can struggle sometimes with public recognition and staying visible beyond some songs that caught people's attention on like social media. When a concept doesn't align with that broader entertainment market or what is popular at the time, it can feel like a group is being boxed out of the bigger picture no matter how talented they are. Another reason I think darker concepts suffer amongst girl groups is the issue of production costs and consistency. I think it'd be probably very easy for us to underestimate the amount of effort and work that goes in producing any sort of K-pop concept, but there will be something about creating a darker storyline that is as engaging and thrilling as a horror movie that will be very difficult, especially in 3 minutes or less. That's probably expensive to produce. Darker concepts will often include high-concept music videos, more narrative storytelling, intense choreography that someone very gifted will have to create, and more custom styling options that aren't so widely available, special effects, you name it. These aren't always the kind of visuals you can simply find so readily available and put a vague amount of funding into, and still pull off till its full effect without looking too costumey. Companies are going to want to appear actualized and still have their artists look incredible on stage, and for darker concepts, I don't think this can be done on a shoestring budget. They require commitment from somebody who knows how to create those sorts of vibes, and of course, financial commitment. And while some companies may pull out all the stops for a debut or one standout comeback, very few seem to be prepared to invest long-term into a concept that doesn't guarantee immediate returns. Another reason why darker concepts do not seem to last within the industry for girl groups can link back to what we've already discussed regarding what the labels are willing to do, but I'm going to specifically talk about another major factor that I guess you could say influences K-pop in general, and that is the label's impatience. You know the phrase, Rome wasn't built in a day? This needs to be signposted at every K-pop company building as a daily reminder for them. I'm serious. If the group doesn't go viral right out of the gate or land somewhere at the top of the charts, you'll witness companies often start to panic and worry that they will not see a return on their investment. So instead of building slowly and having faith that a consistent comeback basis of a few releases in a row with similar concepts will help build an audience who understand what you're about, companies will likely just pivot to safe ground instead. And I totally get it, trust me, I do, but you cannot expect the listener to build a bond with the group just based off one release. They will likely need to see more releases of a similar style before they decide if they want to fully commit to standing. And you can't blame them for that. Not to relate this to myself, but it does help sometimes to put things into perspective by bringing it closer to home. But if I as a K-pop YouTuber uploaded one video about K-pop, and then my next video was about sport, and then my next video was about cooking, how could you expect to build an audience when nobody knows for certain what you're about? This is what it feels like when a K-pop group goes through frequent concept changes that seem to dilute the group's discography and identity. And when that identity is lost, it is hard to rebuild it. This is kind of like flip-flopping and telling fans and the market that the company itself doesn't believe in the group's concept, which is a huge red flag, because if you don't believe in what you're selling, how are we supposed to buy it? Okay, the next potential reason for dark concepts suffering amongst girl groups I wanted to discuss is probably a big one, so I'll take a deep breath before we start. Gender expectations. The image of what a K-pop girl group is supposed to be is very deeply ingrained in society, and some could argue that it isn't just the expectations placed upon female K-pop idols, but also women in general, especially in the local or domestic market. There's still a strong bias in Korea towards girl groups appearing approachable, soft, and cheerful. Think the whole girl next door sort of archetype. And while the international K-pop audience might love a good gothic concept or vampire-themed music video, it's not always something that could resonate with the general public in Korea if it alters the perceived image of a girl group. Does that make sense? This might sound like a stretch, but it starts to become more realistic when you compare the attempts of boy groups to portray their images to that of girl groups. Boy groups often have a lot more freedom to go dark or more aggressive and experimental with their sound or image without losing public support. There's been numerous boy groups who have made their name off of harnessing horror-inspired concepts because they align with the idea of like masculine power, rebellion, mystery, things that they want to see. And sometimes it may appear as though boy groups are more encouraged to explore complexity and intensity compared to girl groups who are expected to play it safe, even if they are capable of nailing something darker. This might not just be an expectation on women in the industry, but women within society, and that's when it becomes tricky to navigate. If there's a cultural bias that associates femininity with softness and purity, then a group who goes against the grain is bound to struggle. They're more likely to be seen as too much or unrelatable because they challenge the norm in a way that some parts of the mainstream audience might not be ready for. What's especially frustrating with this is that the Korean media as a whole is no stranger to dark themes. Korean dramas and films are known globally for their bold depictions of supernatural, whether this be in horror or psychological thrillers. For example, if I think zombie, I immediately go to Korean media. So the idea that dark concepts can't be appreciated by Korean audiences isn't entirely true, because in a way it would be totally sensical if there was more representation of this sort of media within K-pop too. But instead there seems to be a divide where they want the K-pop industry to perhaps maintain a different image, and therefore it packages and sells girl groups to be held to more rigid standards of femininity and therefore marketability. That was a lot, oh my god. Okay, so before we close out today's video by discussing if a K-pop girl group with darker concepts could thrive, I thought it would be nice for us to look at an example that did, just to signify that it is possible, and I'm sure because somebody is dying to tell me in the comments. Let's look at Dreamcatcher. Dreamcatcher debuted in 2017 under Dreamcatcher Company, and they fully committed from day one to a concept which blended rock, horror, and fantasy into their music. And in every single comeback that followed their initial debut, the group's identity remained consistent, and it was deeply ingrained into everything they did. Although they did dabble in sorts of different sounds, everything they did still felt actualized and like it was them, if that made sense. Like you could tune into any of their songs and know it was a Dreamcatcher song. So what makes Dreamcatcher so different to any of the other K-pop girl groups who tried and failed to dive into darker waters? The main thing that seemed to stick out about Dreamcatcher's story compared to anybody else's is that they managed to build a decent-sized audience locally in Korea, but alongside this, a massive international fan base that supported their artistic vision. In the Korean charts, their music seemed to perform quite well for a girl group pushing the envelope with their aesthetic and not from like a bigger label, but the girls seemed to thrive amongst global audiences especially. When I went to K-pop Flex in Germany, there were many people there who had travelled from all over the world to attend this concert just to see Dreamcatcher. When they embark on their global tours overseas, they often sell a lot of tickets. Dreamcatcher proved it was possible to succeed with a darker concept because they were able to find a specific audience that resonated with them and appreciated them. Dark concepts have proven very popular in the West and locations like Latin America, which has a large history of folklore, and the group and their label were smart to identify early on where their fan base was growing the most, and they did a lot to nurture this with frequent comebacks and tours. Dreamcatcher's success is also a great example of a group having a company who understood the assignment by maintaining a consistent concept for them. If a group with a darker concept doesn't make an impact in Korea and isn't published properly to international audiences, they'll end up stuck in the middle where they're undervalued in both markets. But Dreamcatcher were able to prove you can succeed with a dark concept as a girl group, providing you have the unwavering label support and long-term global strategy required to cultivate a dedicated fan base. So that leaves us with one last question for today's video. Could a dark concept work and be successful for a K-pop girl group in the future? And to put it simply, I do want to say yes, because there's so much potential there to tap into an area of the market that has so much room for growth. But the thing is, it would not be easy. K-pop trends are cyclical, and we say this all the time. Concepts themselves come in waves, and tastes do change over time. So for example, when New Jeans debuted with their sort of take on the 90s 2000s schoolgirl concept, we then saw more of these sorts of styles of groups pop up once they started to see some success. And this will not be the first or last time we see a group's success lead to an era full of groups trying their hands at similar concepts. In a way, dark concepts have had their moment in the past, but never quite broken into the mainstream consistently for girl groups in the way that some other concepts have. And I feel like we're just waiting for that one standout to start a trend. For a girl group with a dark concept to truly succeed, their label needs to commit fully and for the long haul. This means that from debut onwards, marketing, visuals, music, storytelling, everything needs to align and be executed consistently. Switching concepts every comeback to chase trends won't work, and will simply solidify the idea amongst fans that you have no idea what you're doing and have no sense of direction or plans for the group's future. This sounds easier said than done, of course, and aside from this, the group would also need to build a loyal fandom early, preferably both domestically and internationally, if possible, which I know won't be easy because different audiences around the globe do lean into different aspects of the industry sometimes. But if a group is able to find a fan base early who are more open to edgy or alternative styles in both Korea and around the world, this would then be the perfect opportunity for the label to capitalize on this and invest in local and global promotions. Anything to continue to grow this support worldwide. Like we said earlier, there's something special about dark concepts. They can be so much more than just a song with a creepy music video or songs with like a spooky instrumental you play at Halloween. These darker concepts can be amazing for pushing boundaries and really emphasizing the true extent of an artist's ability to do it all, to be able to dabble in something that could be more complex and pull it off. And there should be no reason why these darker concepts can't open doors for female idols in the same way that brighter concepts have previously, or in the same way they already do for male idols. Girl groups just need their label to be ready to invest deeply and commit fully. Okay guys, and that was it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching if you got this far. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and I would love to hear your thoughts on these dark concepts down in the comments. Why do you think girl groups with darker concepts seem to struggle in the long run? And do you think another girl group with a darker concept could see success in the future, like Dreamcatcher or even more? If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell bell to hear whenever I upload, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys!